Here today with us is Jacqui Williams. She's the Director of Policy and Education for New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Hi, Jacqui.
Hello, Janice.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
What's today's topic going to be?
Whatever you would like.
Okay. Why don't we talk about the criminal justice system?
That's always a great topic. Unfortunately, when we talk about sexual violence, it's one of the areas people always want to know about.
As I was reading some information that's on your website, in your status reports, I was just like astounded reading all the stats. Like, oh my God, I can't believe so few people actually go to jail or stay in jail or get any kind of help in the cases of sexual violence.
Well, the whole thing with, I'm sorry if you can't believe it, but I'm glad we're talking about it, because the whole purpose of giving people information that sexual assaults are still the most underreported crime. So even though it's happening and we hear about it every day, we read about it, we hear it in the newspaper, we see it on the news almost every night, unfortunately, those are still fewer, far fewer than the numbers that actually are affected by it. So the studies that you read, our old status report still showed only 1 out of 10 people actually reported. The number is up. It actually is more people are reporting, but it's still far less than what it actually does occur. So when a person who still doesn't think that what happened to them was a sexual assault, that it was a crime, that anyone's going to believe them, that the perpetrator is going to have any sense of justice, if that person doesn't even trust enough to report it, then they're absolutely right. Nothing's going to happen.
That's really a shame. One of the statistics, I think it was 1 in 100 people that are convicted actually serve more than 1 year.
That's correct. Most sex offenses, and we're talking about, unfortunately, most sex offense cases, as we talked on a show earlier this year, or last year now, that we talked about all the different criminal codes and the different types of behavior that actually equal a sex offense. For most people that are charged with a sex offense, it's the first time. So even if they have been perpetrating criminal activity earlier, once they're charged and they're a first offender, even if it was first-degree rape, according to the definition, it's typical for them to get a lesser charge. And for most things, we're talking about if it's a year or over, that's a felony. For under a year, it's a misdemeanor. If you've never been convicted before, it's very common to have your case pled down to sexual misconduct, which is a misdemeanor, and you're right, the maximum time is 1 year.
It's really incredible. NSCASA website's www.nscasa.org, and we're referring to the section on that homepage where it says stats and reports, and you go to that, and it's a whole bit of information about how the criminal justice system lets offenders off the hook. And there's much more research that you can find also, but this is the one paper that we're talking about, and it's just really astounding. I think also, why are the people that are accused not apprehended?
Well, and again, those are all the types of questions that you see when you look at what used to be made-for-TV movies. Now it's real-life situations. Since we know that the majority of people that commit sexual violence are people that we know. So for a lot of people, that whole disbelief that so-and-so actually did this, I can't believe it. This is so-and-so's brother. This is my best friend's mother. This is my teacher. So to actually make a criminal complaint against a person you know, it isn't just the action that they did. They also have to think about, this is a family member, this is a neighbor, this is someone who goes to school with me. So the thought process is very different when you are acquainted with the person who's perpetrated the crime, because the number of people that are affected by a stranger, more of those people do report. It's not as personal. You don't have to worry about friends and neighbors and colleagues saying, how could you say that about so-and-so? So we have to be very careful and realize that a sex offense is a crime, the same as having your car stolen or your purse snatched. If someone commits a personal offense against you, it's a crime, regardless of your relationship or your status with that person. If they're a family member, a friend, or a colleague, or an employee, it's a crime, and it could be reported, and actions can be taken against that person.
I think that's one of the reasons, too, of not wanting to report it is I think the person who has been victimized doesn't always see it as a crime because they do know the person.
You're absolutely right.
And especially if they're in a relationship with them and they know it was a bad thing or not a good thing, but a lot of times they don't realize that that is a criminal offense. And also, if there was no weapon used, because I think that's another one, is people envision that, you know, it's not rape unless there's a weapon or a knife or, you know, beatings involved, and that isn't true.
Well, actually, with a sex offense, the majority of offenses, as we said, are between people who know each other. And with people who know each other, there is a weapon used. The weapon is actually the human brain. And it's that belief that if I tell you to do something, if you don't do it, something will happen to you. You might get hurt. A family member, a loved one, I might take something or do something. So the weapon is the human brain.
Weapon. Okay.
I mean, of course, the body, any sexual parts of the body are also used, but it's the brain. And that we know this person and we believe them. It's actually very few cases, and it's actually the more distant the relationship, the greater the injury. For example, for people who know each other and don't have an intimate relationship, I need to qualify that.
Okay.
Then usually it's the brain. For people who know each other casually, there might be an open hand used, possibly a fist, possibly some restraint, holding a person back or using body weight. Again, a person who might know each other even less casually, something that they've only seen, the perpetrator might feel the need to use something to restrain the person, in which case usually then it will be a knife, and then after that would be a gun. So it's actually a very small number of cases that guns or knives would be used.
That's what I had read. It was only a few percent that actually used a gun or a knife. So what you're saying then is the less familiar the two people are, usually the more serious,
The greater the harm.
Physical.
Because again, most of us
Restraint.
are taught or socialized to fight harder against a person we don't know. We usually fight against the unknown. And again, most sex offenses are between people who know each other. So someone that you know, you actually will allow closer to you than a person you don't know.
If a person who is raped or sexually assaulted knows the perpetrator, does it ever happen where the police kind of disregard it because they knew him, or the court system or the juries disregard?
That used to happen a lot more than it does now. Most of the police have received extensive training in victimology, in sexual assault, in taking a much better statement than even 10 years ago. The New York State Police Academy has a course every year. Most detectives in local sheriff's departments also have training. So it's not the police. So the statements are taken by a person who is trained to take a statement, regardless of what the crime is. The problems that we still run into, though, are with the courts and the jury. And the jury, as you know, is made up of people like us, and people who don't know what the stats are, people who don't understand sexual assault, and people that may tend to disbelieve a person based upon their knowledge of the perpetrator. So it's not the police, and it's not the way the laws are set up, but those who have to interpret the laws. And we're talking now about the judge, whose court it is, and the jury who makes the decision.
Now, what about the district attorney and the defense attorney? Are any of the, either of those attorneys use that against one or another?
Well, the district attorney's job is to act on behalf of the people, act on behalf of the state. It's their job to prosecute the crime. So they get the information from the police, and they prosecute the case, whatever they need to do in order to present the case and get a conviction. The defense attorney, on the other hand, their job is to get their defendant cleared. So it is their job to do whatever is necessary, and in some cases in the past, that was even trying to do things or say things against the victim as a witness to try to make them seem less credible. In New York, the rape shield law limits a lot of what can be said or asked, and in New York, they also can no longer ask what a person was wearing.
Oh, great.
And that's something the public generally thinks, oh, well, you wore your hair this way, you wore your skirt, you wore slacks, you wore jewelry. That's not an element that can be introduced in New York State.
That's great. I didn't realize that. How recent is that?
I want to say it's definitely within the last 5 years. I'm not sure exactly which year.
Why are so few offenders convicted?
Well, again, depending upon, let's start with the fact that so few victims tell anyone what happened to them, and then going to the police to give a statement, to give all the information, going to a hospital or a sexual assault examiner program to have evidence collected, the entire criminal justice process takes a while.
Yeah.
And people get tired.
Mm-hmm.
People decide they want to put things behind them. People may not believe that they have been believed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the grand jury system if it's a felony.
Mm-hmm.
Going to court, there are a variety of different hearings. There's the whole trial experience if it does go before a judge, and the decision.
Mm-hmm.
In most counties in New York, we're talking about a good year from making a statement to having a disposition.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the other things that happen if there is a trial,
Mm-hmm.
again, we've got those 12 people known as the jury who may not understand what's being presented to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the job of the prosecutor, the district attorney, to give them information, and for the defense attorney also to give them information. They have two different goals in mind.
Mm-hmm.
One is to get a conviction, and one is to get an acquittal. But it's the job of those two people
Mm-hmm.
to convince the jury that to vote one way or the other.
Is there anything that could be done so that the conviction rate does increase?
Well, it's been going up, and some of the reasons it's been going up is better legislation, which we've talked about, is better training for law enforcement to take better statements, having more
Collecting
sexual assault,
evidence,
the evidence
too.
collection.
Yeah, it's
Now that
big.
we've got specially trained healthcare professionals who know what to look for, how to collect it, the prosecutors are handed a case with everything in there. So a lot more cases don't go to trial because they've got the evidence, they've got the statements, and perpetrators actually say, "Oh, wow, you can prove that that was my hair. Well, that's okay. I'll take a plea." And a plea is not a bad thing. A plea doesn't necessarily mean that a person is getting a lighter sentence. It's saving the taxpayers time and effort. And a person can actually plea guilty, which a lot of people don't realize. You can actually plea that, yes, I did this crime, and yes, I'm willing to take whatever sentence is given to me. So more of that has been happening, I want to say, in the last 5 years because of some changes in evidence collection, in witness preparation, and with prosecutors actually using all the tools they have afforded to them.
I know one of the things that bothered me was so many murders are solved because of the evidence from a rape prior to the murder.
That's correct.
But yet, that same evidence can't be applied to, in a rape case, typically because the statute of limitations has run out, or if there wasn't a murder involved, the evidence hasn't been collected, or it hasn't been collected properly. And also,
Or it
I
hasn't
was
been
reading,
processed.
it hasn't
might have been collected but not
processing.
processed.
Yeah, that
And
it can just sit there in
It
the
can
lab
sit there,
waiting.
and if
Yep.
no one asks for it to be processed, and if there's no case on a court docket, you're right. And if more than 5 years in New York has gone by, then the evidence could be there, but the case isn't prosecutable. And that's one of the things that we've been looking at over the last few years, and we're continuing to look at, seeing what we can do in New York to change that statute, especially with evidence collection.
Yeah, that's what I just think it's really wrong. It really needs to be worked on. So call your legislator, write to your legislator, take some action and really start changing some of these laws.
Or again, if you want to know what it is and what you can do, give us a call at Wisconsin. And the office number
Okay.
is 482-4222. And again, we're there Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. If you call at 10 o'clock at night, you'll get our voicemail. But if you call during the day, during work hours, and you want to know about what can be done in New York, what the laws are, and what are some things we'd like to see, I would definitely love to hear from anyone.
Yeah, that's really great. What can be done to have some of the sentencing more appropriate too? I mean, the way it is right now, it's like once the plea bargain, or well, first if it's a felony charge, but then it's pleaded down a misdemeanor, and then when that goes up, then they still can do something else. And anyway,
But we don't
the
worry.
sentencing
It doesn't. It
isn't-
might sound odd, but we don't worry as much about length of sentences
Oh, okay.
as we do about getting people convicted at all, and
Oh.
of people using the laws. The other problem with discussing sentences, and sometimes people think a longer sentence is a good thing.
Right.
We're more concerned with what happens when a person is incarcerated, because unless they committed a murder as part of the sexual assault, the reality is they're going to get out one day. If they haven't received treatment, counseling, rehabilitation, if they're not given a very stringent monitoring program when they get out, the length of the sentence isn't the importance. It's the risk to the community when that
When
person
they do
actually
get
hits.
out.
So we like to talk about looking at monitoring services and things that sex offender treatment programs offer. more so than length of sentences. It's what's happening to that person while they're incarcerated and what provisions are in place for safety once they're released.
Now, are sex offenders required to have any kind of psychological or special treatment while they're in prison?
No, they're not. It's recommended, and that's one of the things we'd like to see, not that it be recommended, but that it be mandated.
Who recommends it? The judge at the time of the sentencing?
It would be a condition of sentencing, and it could also be a condition of parole. What we've seen and what we've been advocating for is more mandated psychological profile, mandated treatment, mandated supervision. One of the things that we were very pleased is with some of the Sexual Assault Reform Act changes of 2003 is a longer period of probation or parole so that a person can be watched or monitored for as long as 10 years. And that's a benefit. Whereas before, if a person did all of their time, you know, you've got good time and full time, and once a person actually completes all their obligations, which used to be as short as 3 years, they were free to come and go and do whatever they wanted to. So with a sex offender, we know that close monitoring is important, and it needs to go on much longer. So depending upon their offense and their sentence, even when they're back in the community or back home or wherever they go, knowing that they can be monitoring and held accountable for 10 years is a very good thing.
Now, what about when you say a judge might say that it's recommended that the offender receive treatment? Is it available in the facilities? I mean, that's another thing. It's like, what type of care is available in the jails? Because, you know, every jail has a different amount of staffing and different
It's inconsistent.
needs.
The changes in New York State over the last decade in terms of building more jail cells and more prison buildings wasn't the same with more programs. So depending upon if a person was under the age of 21, and there are some requirements for education and rehabilitation for those under 21, but for those 21 and over, depending upon the facility, there may not be counselors. There most likely or very less likely would be any type of a sex offender management program. Generally, a person who is sentenced to a felony sentence, a year or longer, might be told they'll get treatment and they'll get monitoring once they're on the outside. We would very much like to see that happen in any facility that has a sex offender. And there are some facilities, there's some states that have certain facilities that are strictly for sex offenders. New York does not currently have that. So whether it's having a separate facility or separate programs within a facility, yes, we would like to see that happen.
Yeah, it's like, well, as sex offenders, they're convicted. If they're convicted, they're going to jail.
They do
Then
time. Yes, they do time.
They do the time, but when they come back out, there's more chance of adult offenders that have offended other adults.
Recidivism
that
is
come
very high
back.
with sex offenders. Recidivism for our audience are people who commit the same crime. And it's a very short period of time for a sex offender who has actually been convicted, has done time, is released, comes back out, and in a very short amount of time, and short, we're talking less than a year, definitely less than 18 months, they've committed the same crime. And hopefully someone has reported it, but that's why we need to have close monitoring systems for people who, once they're released.
Now, what can the public do to help change some of these things?
Again, first and foremost is be aware that it's happening. I mean, education and information is the best thing we can possibly give to anyone, that it is a concern. And then secondarily, then find out about it. If your local assembly person or your senator sits on a committee that that looks at these things, call them and say, this is what we would like. I understand that we need more monitoring. What are you doing about it?
So I think what happens, unless a case is really highlighted in the media, a lot of times the general public isn't aware of what's happening and what these laws are. So unless it touches your own family or friends, you're not aware of it. And then when you find out about it, it's just really devastating.
And that's the greater shock, that most people assume that there are safeguards in
Yeah.
place. Most people would imagine that a sex offender, in fact, would receive treatment, would have a longer period of probation or parole, that there would be specialized counselors available. And those are things that we would like. So the general public needs to actually stand up and say it, that our society deserves this and that we need it. Not just more prison spaces, but we need more services when people are actually sentenced.
Now, what about judges? Can they be approached in terms, if they're recommending treatment, what about sending letters to judges?
That would also be a good thing. One of the areas I keep talking about, things we've done in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, one of the areas that we advocates need to do some more work with and to make more inroads are with judges. We've worked very hard and very well with law enforcement, with prosecutors. Some programs work very well with defense attorneys, with legal aid societies, actually trying to work with judges to better understand the dynamics of sexual violence, what survivors actually need to hear and feel in a courtroom, and the types of sentences that are more appropriate for this type of crime. We'd like to do some more active work.
Because the sentencing so often seems to have to do with the amount of money that was spent sometimes, unfortunately.
Well,
and
I
it's,
wouldn't
you
say
know,
that, Janice.
But I can,
yes,
because I don't work for anyone. So
there is a definite
just,
disparity, yes. So
you
the whole notion of justice being just and equal for everyone, we all know that isn't the fact. So working with the judicial system to make it more just, and regardless of how much, whether a person can hire their own defense attorney or not, regardless if the defendant is a person of color or not, regardless if that person is whatever their social economic status or not, the laws should be applied the same, the sentences should be the same, the recommendations should be the same. And with right now, with indeterminate sentences, which means you can pick within, say if it's 1 to 5, if the judge picks 3 or 2 or 4, it's under their discretion. So we do need to work more heavily with the judicial system to get them to understand and to hopefully make these sentences more just.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What about defense attorneys using different kinds of deterrent tactics to keep the person who's been sexually assaulted from going to trial?
Well, that's their job. Again, their job is to get their defendant off. So having postponements, asking for more paperwork, these are very common tactics, not just in a sexual assault case, any case. If you're a defense attorney, it's almost a gamble. Do you want to go the fast track or do you want to draw it out?
So judge shopping, I think, is one of them. Postponing arraignments and pretrial motions,
Motions,
correct?
just any type of motion. Because you can write a motion to do anything. The judge doesn't have to accept it, but that's a very common tactic. A fast track case is if you try to get it into a court really, really quick.
Okay.
And that's so you can get a decision and hope that nothing else comes up during an investigation. That's a fast track case. Or one that you
Where
want
you
to
hope they
kind
don't
of
find more evidence or witness
possibly
or
that, or
something.
you want to get it out of the public eye, or you want it to
Okay.
look as if you're doing something really, really quickly, that you're on top of it. The dragging it out is perhaps we can find more. Perhaps the person will recant. The witness will change their mind and say, well, it really didn't happen. It wasn't so bad. That maybe other witnesses will either show up or disappear.
Oh,
And by
okay.
disappear, I mean moving away or leave the area. So if things go on long enough, and also the public memory. So if it happened so long ago that people have forgotten, it's off the front pages of the paper, it's no longer a big deal.
And is it really the defense attorney that sort of paces that whole
It's both sides.
activity?
Both sides.
will
Both
do it,
prosecutors
yeah.
and defense attorneys can write motions to do various things. And again, unfortunately, you have to realize that a sexual assault case, unless you mentioned earlier that it was a high-profile case,
Yeah.
doesn't get the same type of notoriety of, let's say, obviously a murder or high traffic accidents. So those cases might be fast-tracked or be taken as a higher profile case. Our prosecutors are elected officials. Our judges are elected officials. So all of this does play into when and how a case is brought to court. There are time frames that are there are a few time frames they have to adhere to, such as when a preliminary hearing must take place, how quickly a case is brought to the grand jury, how long you can hold a person without charging them. All of those things are pretty well laid out. But after that, you can request continuances and motions and delays if people aren't available. So both sides use it. I wouldn't say that it's a
Okay,
weapon.
that's what I was wondering, if it's only
Both
the defense
sides, no,
side
both
or...
sides use whatever is available to them in a court of law. And part of our job as advocates is probably to take a look and see that if one side is doing something more often than the other, there's nothing wrong with saying, is there a particular reason why you want to delay? Or is there some reason you're rushing this forward? And it may not always be in the best interest of the client, the victim, the person that we, in fact, care about. It's not the system, but very often a sexual assault survivor might want a case fast-tracked to get it over and done with, and others might not. So if the prosecutor is moving at a different space than their client, as the advocates, and the advocates, a rape crisis counselor, might in fact say, excuse me, prosecutor, have you discussed your actions with your client?
Okay. So it's not always the defense attorney. And who's actually setting up the parameters that the DA or the defense attorney can operate by?
Those are all a matter of criminal procedure law.
Okay.
It's no individual's decision for a particular courtroom. There is criminal procedure law that's that thick and probably a few more volumes of that. So everyone who is admitted to the bar of New York State has to swear to uphold all the rules and regulations and act accordingly. The things that we see on television and we read about in the newspaper where people maybe interpret things differently, they are still bound by those rules of procedure. And other attorneys can hold them accountable if they do things that are not within their codes of ethics. But within an individual court, the judge is in charge, and the judge can make rulings about what behaviors are appropriate or not appropriate, what types of actions that either side does do or doesn't do. It's ultimately up to the judge to call those shots.
What can people do to get involved or to find out more about the criminal justice system and how it works with a sexual assault case?
Well, I think everyone, unfortunately, as you mentioned before, or rather, very few people have knowledge unless something occurs to them.
Yeah, that's what I think
and
happens
that's
with it.
really, unfortunately, the wrong time to find out
Yeah,
that
right,
you can
I
or
know.
can't do things. So if a person has an interest, there are lots of websites on jurisprudence about the law. Looking on our website, which you already mentioned, www.nyscasa.org, gives information about basic legal procedures and whether it's family court or criminal court, because there are some differences. And if people have questions, it's perfectly okay to call up a court and say, can I have a tour? Can I find out? Why do you do things this way versus that way? And who are those people? And why do they sit there? And why is this one taking notes? And why does that one stand by the door? It's perfectly okay for a citizen to find out what's going on in their courts.
Yeah, and to be in the courtroom in most court cases.
Most
too.
courts are open to the public. You can go in and you can, again, be careful that you know what the rules and regulations are. They do have metal detectors, and there are certain conducts that you can and can't do in a courtroom, and that's what the guard is there for, to explain. But yes, any citizen can go into an open court and sit and observe.
So I hope you've gotten a lot of information from Jacqui Williams today. I thank you so much for being here and sharing this topic with us.
Well, thank you for having me and asking the questions that lots and lots of other people maybe haven't thought of.
Yeah, I know. I never had, so I put them together. I was like, oh, I want to find out more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.